Hi guys, it's Sam here from Sam Strings. Today I'm going to show you a tutorial video on how to restring a Babolat Pure Drive tennis racket using the two-piece stringing method. So I'm going to use a hybrid setup with some Solinco Mach-10 sort of copolyester strings on the mains with some Solinco Vanquish multifilament string on the crosses. So first things first, this racket's pretty generic, so it is a 16 by 19 string pattern. It's 100 square inches head size. So for this particular frame, as it's got 6 holes at the throat, we're going to start from the bottom of the racket. Generally speaking, if it has 6 at the bottom, you'll start from the throat of the racket. If it's got 8, generally speaking, you'll start at the head of the racket. So first things first, for this I've got approximately 5.7 meters of string for the mains, and you have to make sure when you start you've got an equal amount of string on both sides, just to make sure you're not caught short on one side. So to start the mains, I'm going to pull tension on both strings to begin with. I'm going to clamp it at the throat on one side, which is closest to me, and then I'm going to hold tension outside of the frame on the same string with sort of like a parnell pad and your starting clamp. So put your pad first, followed by your clamp. That will protect your frame a little bit. It should be fine without the pad, but just to give it a bit of extra protection, a soft pad, make sure there's going to be no scratches on the frame. So now I've done that, I've basically pulled half tension on the first string. I'm now going to pull full tension on the first string on the other side and clamp as close to the edge of the frame as possible. I'm then going to repeat the process for main strings 2 and 3. So number 2, when you're coming through the throat of the racket, always put your main string so it comes under the frame and not over. If you do it over the frame, when you pull tension on your string head, potentially you could scratch the frame or burn the string, so always make sure you go under the frame in the throat section. So I'm just going to go up to main string 3 here on the left hand side. I'm then going to repeat the process on the right side of the frame. You never sort of want to go more than 2 or 3 strings ahead at a time. Keeps the pressure on the frame sort of consistent. So this is the first string on the other side now. I'm going to remove the pads and the starting clamp, but we're going to use it for the cross strings shortly. So we're just going to start to repeat the process on the other side. Again, making sure we go under the frame at the throat and not over the frame. And try and clamp as close to the edge of the frame as possible, but don't obviously touch the grommets. You don't want to damage any of the grommets, so if you're a tiny bit away from the edge, it doesn't really matter, as long as you just get fairly close. So now we've got 3 on both sides. Like I said, it's always good just to go a couple ahead. So I'm going to go up to the 5th main string on the right side of the frame now. So this is number 4. And number 5. When talking about how much string to use for the 2-piece method, like I mentioned earlier, I've used 5.7 meters for the mains here because this is such a standard frame. I'm pretty sure this is going to be the right amount of string, but there's a few factors you've got to consider when doing this. So I'll do it in the most important order. So firstly, string pattern. 16 by 19 is probably your most common string pattern, but if you get an 18 by 20, then you've got 2 extra strings on the mains, 1 extra string on the crosses. So when you're cutting your string, you need to allow for that. On average, frame length is usually about 35 centimeters vertically and about 25 centimeters horizontally. So if you've got an 18 by 20, I mean, realistically, you need just under an extra meter of string, really. So about 90 centimeters extra would do it. So that's important. And then also your string type. So this is polyester and it doesn't tend to stretch too much. So you always need to allow a little bit extra for polyester. Whereas if this was like a softer multifilament synthetic gut or even natural gut, you could probably get away with 5.5 meters compared to 5.7. So you could save definitely 20 or 30 centimeters of string by doing that. So we're going to go up to the 7th main now. And this racket, again, is really standard. The skipped holes for the mains are 7 and 9, top and bottom. So now I've got up to number 7, we're going to skip that. And to be honest, it's usually fairly obvious what ones to skip because your clamp will quite often block the cross string, which tells you that you don't go through that for the mains. And also when you pull tension, when you've got the skipped holes, the gap between the mains will still be the same and it should always still be a straight line for most frames. So that's a few things to watch out for. So we've gone up to the 7th main on the left side. We're going to go up to the 7th on the right side now. Again, your skipped holes will always be identical on both sides. So whatever you do on the left side, you're going to replicate for the right side as well. So we're going to go up to 7. And then we're going to pull tension. This next bit's completely up to you, but I generally pull the final main string at a slightly higher tension, just to allow for any tension loss. But I think whatever you do, just make sure you're consistent. So the tension for this was 48 pounds. So I've gone up to 52 just to pull the last main string. So you can possibly see on that, I've got about 10 centimeters of string spare. So I had plenty of string basically. So again, clamp as close to the edge of the frame as possible. And then just check to see where your tying hole is going to be. Again, usually it's fairly obvious because the grommet will be wider for the tying off holes and it will usually be pretty close to your last main string. So for this example, it's going to be in main string 7 to tie off in. So I'm going to use a parnell knot here. There's probably lots of videos on how to tie one of those, but essentially you're going to do a single hitch, leave it open slightly, go back down the same way, and then the string will go through your exposed hole, such as that. And then we're just going to take away any of the slack, put it nice and tight into the frame, such as that, and then pull the remainder of the string back through. And again, just make sure it's nice and tight. You don't want to over tighten it, but obviously you don't want it to be loose either, so it's just getting that happy medium on how tight. And I think that's something you just get to grips with over time, and you realise how tight a knot needs to be basically. So again, we're going to over pull on the other side, so I'm putting this at 52 pounds rather than 48 pounds. And again, you're tying off hole and you're tying off knot, make sure it's exactly the same as the other side. That way you're going to get consistent knots on both sides, and it's going to look consistent for your client as well, or for yourself. So again, single hitch, leave it slightly open, and then back up through the exposed hole. And then we're going to take away any slack, put it into the frame, make sure it's nice and tight. and then pull the remainder of the main string through. So now that's done, we're going to release the clamps because your main strings are complete. We're going to be starting at the head of the racket, so let's put our clamps in the right direction, and then we're going to snip away the excess main string. Don't leave sort of like a fairly short tail, and then push it back into the frame, especially for polyester because the string can be quite sharp. So if you push it back into the frame, the tail, then no one should get hurt if they've got some sort of sweeping forehand. So for my cross strings, I'm going to start this way actually. Like I said, I've got Solinco Vanquish, which is a softer multifilament. So because it's a little bit soft, well, quite a bit softer, I'm going to do a slightly higher tension of 50 pounds for this. And then there's a few ways to start the cross strings. You could start with a starting knot, which is completely fine, but I'm going to hold tension with my clamp and parnell pad again, and I'm going to use the parnell knot. So what I generally do is I'll start at cross 2 and I'll come back to cross 1, just because that way I haven't got to pull the entire lot of string through both times. So I'm going to start at cross 2, just get that through there, and I'm going to start under the main string, and we're going to finish over the main string. And because this is a blocked hole, your little pliers can help you just push that softer string through. Such as so. And now I'm going to go back into the first cross and just make sure that my weave is opposite to the one I've just done. So if this string went under, I must go over here. So I'm going to start over and I'm going to finish under. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make sure there's enough string to get to the edge of the tension head, which there is. And now, before I pull tension, I'm going to get my sort of power pad and my starting clamp again, and I'm just going to hold this on the outside of the frame, such as so, and then I'm going to pull tension and then clamp. So we're not going to tie any knots just yet. We're going to get 3 cross strings in before going back to tie this knot. So, and for this I've cut 5.2 meters of string, I believe. Because this is a softer multi-filament, it's going to stretch a fair amount, which is why I can get away with only using 5.2 meters. If it was a poly, for the same frame, I'd be using sort of 5.35 or 5.4 meters. And again, always consider the factors we spoke about earlier. So the string pattern, what string type you're using, the head size is important. If you get like a massively oversized frame, like some of these heads TI frames, which are huge, you need to factor in the different head sizes. There's actually a really good website which I used to use when I first started called, I think it's Clipper or Clipper USA, and it's essentially a database of every frame you can think of, and when you click into the manufacturer, it will tell you things like the skipped holes, how much string to use, where to tie off, etc. So I used to use that a lot when I first started, just to use it as a reference, just to make sure that it seems factually correct with the frame I had in front of me, which used to help me out. So we've gone up to the third, and I'm not going to pull tension on the fourth just yet, but I'm just going to thread the string through. So, because in a sec, we're going to tie off the cross string there. So again, I'm pulling £50 of tension on this, on the cross strings, but for the tying off hole I'm going to use 54, so I'm going to jump up £54. I'm going to pull tension, I'm going to remove power pads and the starting clamp. I'm then going to clamp the first cross string, going to drop my tension back down to 50. Then again, you're going to find your tying off hole, which should be fairly self-explanatory because they're usually wider by nature. So this one's quite clearly across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you tie off on the 6th main string. And again, we're going to use a parnell knot. So all of our knots on this frame are going to be exactly the same, which again, it's going to look consistent. And there's nothing wrong with the starting knot, but quite often with the starting knot, it's hard for it to for the tail to finish above here. Instead, sometimes it finishes parallel to the string, which means that if you're doing like rough or smooth for serve, not all of them are going to be rough or smooth on the same side potentially. So. And now we're just going to finish the cross strings all the way down. So when you're pulling your string through, it's good to sort of move it up the frame and then down, just to make sure you don't get any string burn, which is, it's even more important when you've got a soft string that you're putting across a tougher string that's shaped, which is what I'm doing. So never pull it in a straight line, basically always do it in like a curved motion. Then also be careful for your clamps at the side to make sure that you don't unnecessarily sort of bend the string while you're putting tension. I've never snapped a string doing that, but I'm sure if you was doing it with like a fragile natural gut, that could probably quite easily happen. So. In terms of like, if you're going to try to weave or anything, basically one finger below, one finger above, and then just try and glide through, and use as much as the string bed as you can, so you can go down the string bed just to give yourself a bit more space to do it. And if you're practicing doing that, it's far easier with a softer string. So this soft multifilament is actually quite easy, whereas if you was using like a really stiff, rough polyester, it's really tricky to weave, like particularly when you get towards the bottom of the cross strings, because the lack of space to work with and the stiffness of the string makes it quite tricky to weave effectively. But if you start with a softer string first, when you get to a poly, then you know what to do, and you might not be able to weave it as fluidly, but you'll still be able to weave it. So, and again, try and clamp as close to the edge of the frame as possible without impacting the grommets. So not too many to do now. So we're almost at the halfway point of the cross strings now. At some point you're going to have to flip your clamps to start facing downwards. So I usually sort of do that around the halfway point, so which would be about now, to be fair, because your clamps won't reach facing the same direction for the entirety of the cross strings. So now that I'm halfway, I'm going to just spin that clamp around, and now we're going to face downwards, which will also give you a bit more space because the clamp won't be in the way of the remainder of the cross strings. And when you're putting tension on your cross strings, you want to try and keep them as straight as you can to stop you from having to keep moving the cross strings to straighten them up. So a simple way you can try and do this is just before you pull tension, sort of push your cross string up into the one above and sort of hold your fingers below and just allow it to move your finger out of the way. That way it's going to be fairly straight. We're still going to use a setting off oil at the end to straighten the strings further, but they're going to come off pretty straight if you do it that way. Whereas if you don't do anything, you're going to get massive curves in your cross strings, and then you're going to have to move them a lot, and then you're going to lose tension in your cross strings. So, and again, a thing I forgot to mention is that I'm always sort of going one string ahead. So I'm putting tension here, but I've already weaved the next string ready. So, and again, the reason you do that, it gives yourself a bit more space with your clamps. But we'll get to a point towards the end where we'll run out of string to do that, and we'll just have to go same string for, I don't know, 3 strings maybe. But we'll get there in a sec. So yeah, again, hold the string up to the one above and just let it move your finger out of the way. Clamp as close to the side. And for anyone that hasn't used like Solinco strings, I always find them super good. So they're good in terms of they're really high quality, but they're also good in terms of their price point. They're not the cheapest, but also they're not the most expensive. They're nowhere near as expensive as Luxolong. And yeah, the quality is really good. The range of different string types is really good. They do soft variations of pretty much every string which they sell. They have different shape profiles. They come in different gauges, different colours. And the softer Vanquish as well is a really popular multi-filament of mine. So Solinco's are probably my most popular string brand. Has been for a while. So I'd definitely recommend you buy a few sets to give them a go if you've not done so already. And yeah, this Mach-10 string, which comes in like a nice blue, is their sort of latest copoly to their collection. And in terms of string gauges for this, the poly is a 1.25 millimeter thickness, and then the multi is slightly thicker, 1/3, 1.30, because it's obviously a bit softer. It's going to be the string that breaks first, basically. So now we're getting pretty close to our last few cross strings. And then there's going to be one thing which I'm going to mention when you get to your sort of blocked holes in a sec. One sort of important piece of information. So, attention. So when we get to here, you'll notice that you're going to have to go into 2 sort of blocked string areas where you can either go above or below in both instances. You want to try and keep this consistent. So on the side where you're actually tying off your hole, it doesn't matter quite as much. But on the other side, where you're basically coming through and then straight back into it, you need to make sure that it's the same corresponding direction, basically. So if you come out of the bottom of this string here, you need to go into the bottom of that string there. And if you go into the top, you want to go into the top. Otherwise, you're going to get your cross string which crosses over in 2 different, so you come out of the bottom into the top. Doesn't look very good, and it's also not great for the string because you'll create a bit of unnecessary friction there. So one thing just to check when you're doing it, because if you're doing it without thinking, you won't even think about that. But just to make sure, and because this is such a popular string pattern with the skip 7th and 9th holes, you're going to see this all the time. So if you get into that habit from the get-go, it will look more professional straight away. So like I said, I'm running out of string now, so I'm not going to go 1 string ahead anymore. And I always like to try and go through the bottom, only because I feel like gravity helps you a bit more when you're tying the knot. So otherwise you can get it can look a little bit messy when you tie it off. So if it's an option, I usually try and go through the bottom. If it's quite obviously more space at the top, then I'll go through the top because I don't really want to force it. But finishing beneath is my general preference. And I'll try and show you what it looks like in a sec. So I think you can see that I've come out of the bottom of the under the main strings at the bottom, and then we're going to go into the bottom again in a second, so it's going to look neat inside. So I'm just going to pull tension first. And then we're going to go into the bottom, and I'll try and show you what it looks like. Again, you can, these are really useful for doing that. So a bit of a tip, but the angle of the string, so this one, always cut it at an angle to start, but then the angle of the string point in the direction that you want to go. So because I wanted this to go out of the bottom, I'm pointing the angle down towards the bottom. And again, when you get towards the last few strings around your skipped holes, make sure you're weaving in the correct sequence, because it will change. So you need to just always make sure that your sequence, you never sort of double weave by mistake, or misweave by mistake. And again, we're going to try and come out the bottom at the end if we can. It's a bit harder, but with a little bit of perseverance, it's fine. And just to show you what I mean, so you can see now, when I pull it, it's going to look nice and neat because we've come out of the bottom and then back into the bottom. And then for the final cross string, we're going to pull at 54 again. Before I do that, I'm just going to make sure that there's no misweaves. So I usually just I'll pick a random string and I'll just run my finger from top to bottom and just make sure there's no misweaves. And I'll do that on a couple of strings perhaps. I'll choose one over here. All looks good. And then finally, if you look down the frame, usually if you've double misweaved or double weaved, it looks like it stands out like a sore thumb. So you can usually just tell where the error is, but that all looks good. So we're going to pull our last cross at 54. We're going to look to see where we're going to tie off and not block that hole. We're going to clamp off. I'm going to put the stringing machine back down to flat as we're finishing with the strings. This Pure Drive we're going to tie off at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we started in the 6th main for the crosses, for the knot, and we're going to finish at 6 for the bottom of the crosses. And again, we're going to use the parnell knot, so we're going to do a single hitch. Just making sure that it looks neat on the outside of the frame. We're then going to leave a hole exposed, go back around the same direction, pull the string through the hole, and then get our starting clamp to firstly remove the slack and then to put it nice and tight against the frame. And then we're going to put tension like that, and then we're going to release our clamps, put them back to their positions, snip away the excess string again, push the tails into the frame, same for the top string, and then finally I like to use a setting off oar, which is, it looks like an oar but it's got a much flatter tip to it, and basically what you do is you will push your cross strings up. Generally, if you've started from the head down, which you should do, you'll usually find you just need to pop the strings up all the way down. So this takes a little bit of getting used to if you buy it for the first time. But you basically just quite gently just knock the strings into the nice straight direction. And to be fair, I generally do this for every string, but if your strings are perfectly straight and only one or two look a little bit uneven, then just obviously just target the strings which look misaligned. Do that all the way down. And now we can take the frame off of the machine. I usually release the clamps in the middle first, and then side clamps, then it will just come off. So yeah, that was Solinco Mach-10 on the mains with Solinco Vanquish on the crosses, Babolat Pure Drive 16x19 string pattern, and then it all looks super nice and neat. Even at the head, all looks good. Cool. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys.